Hello, dear listeners. I'm Claire, your storyteller from Midnight Tales. Tonight, I'll share a special story about beginning again when you think everything has ended. Where are you listening from? Leave a comment below, and let's dive into our tale. The biting wind of late autumn seemed to mock Margaret Walsh, swirling around her worn coat and tugging at Rusty's gray fur. The 12-year-old retriever pressed closer to her legs, his roomy eyes looking up with unwavering loyalty. 6 decades of life had brought Maggie, as everyone called her, to this moment. A park bench at dusk, a loyal dog, and exactly $1 in her pocket. "What do you think, old friend?" she whispered, scratching behind Rusty's ears. "We've had worse days, haven't we?" But had they? 40 years as a nurse, caring for others through their darkest hours, a career she'd started at 22, fresh out of nursing school and eager to make a difference. A 30-year marriage to Frank, ended 5 years ago by cancer that devoured their savings before taking his life. And now, evicted from her apartment of 20 years because the building had been sold to developers with dreams of luxury condominiums. The crumpled newspaper page in her hand had caught her attention as it skittered across the park, carried by the same wind that chilled her bones. The bold headline seemed almost absurd. "Historic Oak Ridge Manor, yours for $1." Below it, a photograph of a once magnificent Victorian mansion, now clearly neglected, its grandeur faded but not forgotten. "Probably a scam," Maggie muttered. Yet something about the image held her gaze. Those windows, like tired eyes, seemed to look directly at her. A ridiculous notion, of course. Houses don't look, houses don't choose, houses don't call to people across time. Her fingers found the cell phone in her pocket, the last luxury she had maintained. Her son James had insisted she keep it, though he rarely called from Seattle, too busy with his own life to remember his mother existed on the other side of the country. Maggie dialed the number on the advertisement, expecting voicemail at this hour. Instead, a crisp voice answered on the third ring. "Morgan Property Management. This is Sarah speaking." 20 minutes later, Maggie had an appointment for the following morning. She would meet Sarah Morgan at Oak Ridge Manor, located on the outskirts of town, to discuss the unique circumstances of the property. The dollar in her pocket suddenly felt heavy with possibility. That night, huddled with Rusty under a bridge, wrapped in their shared blanket, Maggie dreamed of warm rooms and solid walls, of belonging somewhere again. Dawn broke with unexpected clarity, the sky a canvas of pink and gold that promised nothing but painted everything with hope. The walk to Oak Ridge Hill was longer than Maggie had anticipated. Her nurse's legs, accustomed to 12-hour shifts, carried her steadily upward, while Rusty trotted beside her, occasionally stopping to rest his aging joints. As they crested the hill, Oak Ridge Manor revealed itself, and Maggie stopped dead in her tracks. "My God, Rusty," she breathed, "we've bought ourselves a castle." The mansion stood 3 stories tall, its Victorian architecture an elegant skeleton draped in the tattered finery of peeling paint and creeping ivy. A sweeping porch wrapped around the front, punctuated by columns that still stood proud despite their deterioration. Windows, dozens of them, reflected the morning light, some broken, others boarded up, yet the overall effect remained imposing, almost regal in its decay. Sarah Morgan waited on the porch steps, a slim woman in her 40s, clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Maggie and Rusty making their way up the overgrown drive. "Mrs. Walsh, I wasn't expecting—" Her gaze traveled over Maggie's worn clothes, the small backpack containing all her worldly possessions, then to Rusty with his graying muzzle. Something flickered in Sarah's expression. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps, though they had never met. "It's Miss Walsh now," Maggie corrected gently. "And yes, I have my dollar ready." She attempted a smile that felt rusty, like a door hinge long unused. Inside, the manor was a cathedral to forgotten elegance. Dust sheets draped over furniture created ghost-like forms in the vast foyer. A grand staircase swept upward, its carved banister telling stories of hands that had glided along its surface in another era. Despite the chill and decay, something about the space felt expectant. as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting. Sarah explained the property's history in clipped, professional tones. Oakridge Manor had been vacant since 1929, when its last owner, Eliza Thornfield, vanished without a trace. With no direct heirs and a complex legal entanglement that had only recently been resolved, the property was now available for symbolic sale, provided the buyer agreed to certain historical preservation covenants. The house must be maintained, not demolished, Sarah emphasized, sliding another document across the makeshift table she had set up in what had once been a formal parlor. Any renovations must preserve the historical integrity of the structure. And why only $1? Maggie asked, her nurse's instinct for spotting half-truths prickling. Sarah's eyes darted away. The property has been challenging to sell. The historical restrictions, the remote location, the extensive repairs needed. A pause. And there have been stories over the years. Local superstitions, nothing more. As Maggie signed her name to document after document, Rusty wandered the room, sniffing at corners. Suddenly, he froze, his attention fixed on a darkened doorway. Instead of barking, as he normally would at an intruder, his tail began to wag slowly, his ears perked forward in friendly recognition. "Rusty, what is it, boy?" Maggie called. Sarah followed her gaze to the empty doorway and paled slightly. The house settles. Old pipes? Old wood. It makes sounds. When the signing was complete, Sarah accepted Maggie's dollar with something like reverence, carefully placing it in a small velvet pouch. At the doorway, she paused, looking back at Maggie with an expression that had softened. "Ms. Walsh, the town library has extensive records on the Thornfield family. If you're interested in the history of your new home." Her emphasis on "your" seemed deliberate. "And welcome to Oakridge Hill." As the sound of Sarah's car faded down the drive, Maggie stood in the center of the foyer, the reality of her situation settling around her like the dust disturbed by their footsteps. No electricity, no running water, no heat as winter approached. But walls, a roof, and somewhere to belong. "Well, Rusty," she sighed, "we'd better find some firewood before dark." That first night in Oakridge Manor was a study in contrasts. The bone-deep cold of the massive house, yet the surprising warmth of the small fire Maggie had managed to build in one of the downstairs fireplaces. The absolute darkness beyond their small circle of firelight, yet the strange sense of shelter, of homecoming. Maggie dozed fitfully, wrapped in her blanket with Rusty curled against her side. Just before midnight, she jerked awake, certain she had heard music, the delicate notes of a piano drifting down from somewhere above. Rusty's ears were perked, his head tilted in curious attention rather than alarm. "You hear it too?" she whispered. Rusty's tail thumped once against the floor. The music continued, a melancholy waltz that seemed to echo not just through the house but through time itself. Maggie should have been frightened, but instead, she felt an unexpected peace settle over her. She closed her eyes, listening until the final notes faded, then drifted back to sleep. Morning brought a knock at the front door, startling both Maggie and Rusty from their huddled position by the now cold fireplace. Stiff and disoriented, Maggie made her way to the door, wary of who might be calling at this early hour. On the porch stood a man in his mid-60s, broad-shouldered and sturdy, with silver-streaked hair and eyes the clear blue of a summer sky. He wore worn work clothes and carried a toolbox in one weathered hand. "Thomas Graham," he introduced himself simply. "Heard someone finally bought the old Thornfield place." His gaze was direct but kind. "Thought you might need help getting settled." Maggie hesitated, caution warring with desperation. "Why would you help a stranger?" Thomas's smile creased the corners of his eyes. "My grandfather was caretaker here back in Eliza's day. My father after him, until the money from the trust ran out in the 60s. He glanced past her at the dilapidated foyer. "Some things are family traditions." Over the next few hours, Thomas proved his worth and then some. He got the ancient wood stove in the kitchen working, located a hand pump in the garden that still drew water, and showed Maggie how to operate the manor's old systems. As they worked, he shared stories about Oakridge Manor and its former inhabitants. The Thornfield family had been prominent in the area during the early 1900s, with Eliza inheriting the estate after her parents died in quick succession in the late 1920s. She was ahead of her time, Thomas explained, cleaning decades of grime from the stovepipe. Managed the family businesses, spoke her mind, never married despite plenty of suitors. Then one morning in spring 1929, she was simply gone. No note, no packed bags. Her automobile still in the garage, her passport in her desk. What happened to her? Maggie asked, fascinated despite the press of more immediate concerns. Thomas shrugged, his expression guarded. No one knows for certain. There were theories, kidnapping, suicide, flight, but no body was ever found, no ransom demanded. The most common belief is that she foresaw the market crash and went into hiding with the family fortune. He paused, studying Maggie's face with sudden intensity. You know, it's strange. There's a portrait of Eliza in the library. You resemble her remarkably. Before Maggie could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was an elderly woman with snow-white hair and bright, curious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She introduced herself as Martha Jenkins, a neighbor from half a mile down the road, and presented Maggie with a casserole dish and a loaf of homemade bread. Word travels fast in small towns, Martha explained with a warm smile, especially when someone finally buys Oak Ridge Manor after all these years. As they sat in the kitchen, enjoying the first hot meal Maggie had eaten in days, Martha proved to be a fountain of local knowledge, particularly about the Thornfield family. My grandmother was a maid here, she confided, leaning forward as if sharing a secret. Such stories she told. Balls in the grand ballroom, famous guests from Boston and New York. Eliza was the crown jewel of the county. Beautiful, intelligent, independent. Martha's expression grew somber. But there were darker tales, too, about Edwin Blackwell, her father's business partner. After Eliza disappeared, he tried to claim ownership of the estate, insisted there had been some arrangement. The courts tied everything up for decades. She lowered her voice further. His grandson, Harold Blackwell, has been trying to get his hands on this property for years. He won't be pleased that someone else has purchased it, especially for $1. As Martha prepared to leave, she drew Maggie aside, glancing to ensure Thomas couldn't overhear. There's something else you should know, dear. From her handbag, she withdrew a small, yellowed photograph. This was Eliza Thornfield. Maggie's breath caught. The woman in the photograph wore the fashion of the late 1920s. A cloche hat, a strand of pearls, a drop-waist dress. But it was her face that caused Maggie's hands to tremble. The same high cheekbones, the same slightly asymmetrical smile, the same determined set of the jaw that Maggie saw in her own mirror. The house has a way of finding its people, Martha whispered, of calling them home. Have you ever felt fate drawing you to exactly where you needed to be? Leave a comment below and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next part of our story. Now, let's return to Maggie's journey. That night, Maggie dreamed of a woman playing piano in the moonlight, her slender fingers dancing across the keys. The woman turned, her face in shadow, and pointed toward a painting on the wall, an unremarkable landscape of Oak Ridge Hill in its prime. Maggie woke with a start, Rusty already alert beside her. The dog wasn't alarmed but seemed expectant, his tail sweeping slowly across the floor as he gazed at nothing Maggie could see. Then, deliberately, he rose and walked toward the doorway, looking back as if asking her to follow. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, grabbing the flashlight Thomas had left her. Rusty led her through the darkened house, his path unerring despite the unfamiliar surroundings. They ended in what must have been the library, walls lined with empty bookshelves, a massive desk draped in dusty cloth, and several paintings still hanging askew on the faded wallpaper. Among them was the landscape from her dream. Drawn by instinct she couldn't explain, Maggie approached the painting. Rusty whined softly, pawing at the wall beneath it. When she lifted the frame, she found it was hinged on one side, concealing a small recess in the wall. Within it, a tiny brass button gleamed in her flashlight beam. Heart-pounding, Maggie pressed it. A section of the bookshelf to her right swung inward with a soft groan, revealing a narrow passageway. Rusty darted in without hesitation, his tail wagging furiously. Maggie followed, her nurse's pragmatism warring with a sense of wonder she hadn't felt in decades. The passage opened into a small, square room the time seemed to have forgotten. Unlike the rest of the manor, no dust sheets covered the furnishings here. A writing desk stood in the center, its surface neat and organized. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. Against the opposite wall, a large iron safe was built into the stonework. On the desk lay an open journal, the elegant handwriting filling its pages clearly from another era. Beside it, a stack of documents tied with faded ribbon. With trembling fingers, Maggie lifted the journal. The first visible page was dated October 12, 1928, and signed Eliza Thornfield. For the next several hours, as darkness gave way to dawn, Maggie read by flashlight. Eliza's words painted a vivid picture of a woman ahead of her time, intelligent, determined, increasingly concerned about her father's business partner, Edwin Blackwell. After her father's death, Eliza had discovered irregularities in the family finances. Large sums had been diverted, investments manipulated, all leading back to Blackwell. When she confronted him, he threatened her, claiming her father had signed over partial ownership of their assets, including Oak Ridge Manor. The final entries became increasingly urgent, fearful. Eliza suspected Blackwell would stop at nothing to gain control of the Thornfield fortune, especially after she discovered evidence of his criminal activities. She wrote of plans to secure the family assets, to hide them where Blackwell could never find them. The last entry, dated just days before her disappearance. I must protect what remains of our legacy. If anything happens to me, the truth lies with the morning roses where light first touches new beginnings. Among the documents on the desk, Maggie found a yellowed family tree. As she traced the branches with her finger, her heart nearly stopped. There, connected to Eliza's name by a dotted line indicating adoption or informal relation, was Elizabeth Sterling, born November 1929, months after Eliza's disappearance. The line continued. Elizabeth Sterling had married James Walsh. Their daughter, Margaret Walsh, had been born in 1961. Margaret Walsh, Maggie? Maggie's heart nearly stopped. She wasn't just a random person who had purchased an abandoned mansion for $1. She was Eliza's direct descendant, drawn back to Oak Ridge Manor by threads of fate woven across nearly a century. Lost in these revelations, she hadn't noticed the soft footsteps approaching the hidden doorway until Thomas's voice came from the entrance, startling her. I knew it the moment I saw you, he said, setting a tray of coffee and fresh bread on the desk. You have her eyes, her spirit. You knew. Maggie's voice caught somewhere between accusation and wonder. Thomas nodded, setting the tray on the desk. Suspected. My grandfather told my father, who told me Eliza had been with child when she disappeared. The child was given to distant relatives for protection, the connection deliberately obscured to keep Blackwell from finding her. His eyes met hers, steady and certain. The house has been waiting for a Lancaster to return. For you, Maggie. That afternoon, as Maggie tried to process this revelation, a sleek black luxury car pulled up the overgrown drive. From it emerged a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed at odds with the rural surroundings. His silver hair was expertly styled, his posture that of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Harold Blackwell introduced himself with practiced charm that never quite reached his cold gray eyes. He surveyed the dilapidated mansion with the air of someone assessing a business opportunity rather than a historical treasure. Ms. Walsh, I understand congratulations are in order, he began, his voice smooth as polished stone. Purchasing Oak Ridge Manor is quite an achievement. I'm prepared to offer you $200,000 for the property, 200,000 times your investment. A generous offer by any standard. I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Blackwell, Maggie replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. This is my home now. Something flickered in Blackwell's eyes, irritation perhaps, or the first stirrings of genuine anger. You misunderstand me, Ms. Walsh. This house and everything connected to it rightfully belongs to my family. Your claim, Whatever you believe it to be won't stand against our resources. I understand the value of things perfectly well, Mr. Blackwell, and especially of people. Maggie held his gaze, feeling strength flow through her that she hadn't known for years. The answer is no. As Blackwell turned to leave, his mask of civility slipped further. You bear a remarkable resemblance to Eliza Thornfield, Ms. Walsh. I hope your fate isn't similarly unfortunate. The threat, thinly veiled as it was, hung in the air between them. Thomas, who had observed the exchange from a distance, approached as Blackwell's car disappeared down the drive. It's beginning again, he murmured, his expression grim. The Blackwell family has never given up their claim to Oak Ridge Manor or the Thornfield fortune. The following days brought a flurry of activity. With Thomas's help, Maggie began the mammoth task of making one section of the manor habitable. They cleared debris, patched the worst leaks in the roof, and set up a generator for minimal electricity. Through it all, Maggie continued to explore Eliza's secret study, piecing together the puzzle of her great-grandmother's life and disappearance. The more she learned, the more certain she became that Eliza had not abandoned Oak Ridge Manor willingly. She had fled to protect her unborn child from Edwin Blackwell. The key is hidden where the sun first touches the morning rose, Maggie repeated to Thomas, quoting Eliza's journal. What do you think it means? Together, they explored the overgrown gardens at dawn, watching where the first rays of sunlight touched the wild roses that had once been carefully tended. Beneath one particular bush, half hidden by decades of growth, they discovered a small metal box. Inside lay an ornate key, tarnished but intact. The key fit the safe in Eliza's study perfectly. Within, they found leather pouches filled with gold coins, bundles of stock certificates, and a collection of exquisite jewelry. More valuable than all of these, however, was a packet of letters, correspondence between Eliza and her lawyer, detailing Edwin Blackwell's criminal activities and her fear for her safety. As Maggie and Thomas were cataloging these discoveries, a knock at the door announced the arrival of an unexpected visitor, a social worker from Adult Protective Services, responding to an anonymous report about an elderly woman with possible mental health issues living in condemned property. The intrusion was clearly Blackwell's doing, a gambit to have Maggie declared incompetent and removed from Oak Ridge Manor. Though she successfully convinced the social worker of her sound mind and improving living conditions, the incident left her shaken. That evening, her phone rang, James, her son, calling for the first time in months. Mom, what's this I hear about you buying some derelict mansion? His voice carried more irritation than concern. Someone named Blackwell contacted me, said he's worried about your mental state. He suggested a nice retirement community that has an opening. The realization that Blackwell had reached out to her son, attempting to manipulate him into removing her from Oak Ridge Manor, filled Maggie with cold fury. After ending the call with a promise to discuss things further later, she sat in Eliza's study, staring at the portrait of her great-grandmother. I won't let them take this from us, she whispered to the empty room. Not again. That night, as if in answer, the piano music returned, more insistent than before. Rusty led Maggie to the ballroom, where moonlight streamed through broken windows onto a grand piano draped in a dust sheet. Though no one sat at the bench, the keys moved slightly, creating a melancholy melody that raised goosebumps on Maggie's arms. I'm tired of being afraid, she said aloud, her voice echoing in the vast space. Of feeling useless, invisible. I spent my life caring for others, as a nurse, a wife, a mother. Now I don't know who I am if not those things. The music softened, becoming almost gentle, comforting. But I'm still here, Maggie continued, a new resolve strengthening her voice. I survived, and I'm not giving up Oak Ridge Manor without a fight. When you face great loss in life, what helps you find your strength again? Share your experience in the comments. Now, let's see how Maggie faces this challenge. Blackwell's next move came swiftly and legally. He filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all assets connected to Oak Ridge Manor, claiming Maggie was mentally unfit to make financial decisions and that the property sale itself was invalid based on a century-old business agreement between his grandfather and Eliza's father. Thomas introduced Maggie to Eleanor Williams, a retired attorney in her 70s who specialized in historical property disputes. Eleanor's eyes lit up when she heard Maggie's story and saw the documentation from Eliza's study. "I've been waiting for this moment for 40 years, Eleanor confessed, examining the letters with reverent care. "My grandmother was friends with Eliza. We always believed the Blackwell family was behind her disappearance, but could never prove it." She looked up at Maggie, determination sharpening her gaze. "Until now." The court battle was brief but intense. Blackwell's attorneys painted Maggie as an opportunistic drifter with possible cognitive decline, while Eleanor presented irrefutable documentation of Maggie's lineage and Eliza's rightful ownership of the estate. The turning point came when Eleanor produced Eliza's affidavit, filed with her grandmother's law firm days before her disappearance, detailing her fears of Edwin Blackwell and her explicit wishes for her inheritance. The judge, Sarah Rodriguez, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, ruled decisively in Maggie's favor, confirming her legal ownership of Oak Ridge Manor and all assets connected to it. As Maggie left the courthouse, she felt lighter than she had in years. The validation of her connection to Eliza, the legal recognition of her right to Oak Ridge Manor. These were victories not just for herself, but for a legacy that had nearly been erased by time and deceit. That night, she dreamed again of Eliza, more vividly than before. Her great-grandmother stood in the library, urgency in her eyes, pointing toward the windows. Maggie woke with a start, the smell of smoke already filling her nostrils. Oak Ridge Manor was on fire. Rusty's barking pulled her fully awake as flames licked at the curtains, spreading rapidly across the dry, aged wood of the floors and walls. Grabbing only Eliza's journal and the photograph Martha had given her, Maggie stumbled toward the door, Rusty leading the way through thickening smoke. Outside in the cold night air, she watched in horror as fire consumed the east wing of the mansion, the flames reaching hungrily toward the sky. Thomas arrived minutes later, having seen the glow from his cabin down the hill. Together, they could only stand and witness the destruction. By dawn, local firefighters had contained the blaze, but the damage was catastrophic. The east wing, including the grand staircase and several bedrooms, was destroyed. The west wing, which included the kitchen and Maggie's makeshift quarters, suffered severe smoke and water damage but remained structurally intact. As Maggie stood, exhausted and soot-streaked, surveying the smoking ruins, Harold Blackwell's car pulled up to the edge of the property. He emerged, immaculate as always, his expression a careful mask of sympathy that couldn't quite hide the satisfaction beneath. "What a terrible tragedy, Ms. Walsh," he called, approaching but staying just beyond the police line. "Such a historic property lost forever. I understand old houses can be veritable tinderboxes." Thomas stepped protectively closer to Maggie, his body tense with barely controlled rage. "This wasn't an accident, Blackwell. The fire marshal has already found evidence of arson." Blackwell's expression remained unperturbed, though something cold flickered in his eyes. "A serious allegation, Mr. Graham. I hope they find whoever is responsible." He turned his attention back to Maggie. "I imagine this changes your plans considerably. My offer to purchase what remains of the property still stands, though, naturally, given the circumstances, at a reduced rate." "Get off my property, Mr. Blackwell," Maggie said quietly, steel in her voice. "Now." For a moment, Blackwell seemed startled by her vehemence. He recovered quickly, straightening his already impeccable tie. "Consider my offer, Ms. Walsh. You've lost nearly everything. Starting over would be challenging, especially for someone in your situation." As he departed, Maggie finally allowed her composure to crack. The tears came silently at first, then in heaving sobs that bent her double with their force. Thomas's arm around her shoulders provided silent support, his own eyes bright with unshed tears for the house he had loved his entire life. Martha Jenkins opened her home to Maggie and Rusty, providing a temporary haven while they regrouped. The community, having followed the court case in the local paper, rallied with donations of clothing, household items, and offers of help. 3 days after the fire, once structural engineers had declared the remaining portions of Oak Ridge Manor safe to enter, Maggie returned to assess what had survived. The secret study, protected by its stone construction and below-ground location, remained largely intact. Eliza's journal and most of the documents had been with Maggie, safely removed from the fire. In the ruins of what had been the sitting room, Maggie discovered another of Eliza's hiding places, a concealed compartment in the massive stone fireplace. Within it lay an even greater treasure. Rare first editions signed by famous authors, a locket containing a miniature portrait of Eliza's mother, and a pouch of uncut diamonds whose value far exceeded the gold coins from the safe. That evening, sitting at Martha's kitchen table, Maggie reread a passage from Eliza's journal that had new meaning after the fire. A house is only wood and stone. What endures is the purpose we give to our lives, the difference we make for others. James arrived the next day, having finally grasped the seriousness of the situation. His initial anger at his mother's reckless decision faded as he learned the full story and saw the documentation of their family connection to Eliza and Oakridge Manor. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, helping her sort through recovered items. "I should have been here for you before now." Their reconciliation, tentative but genuine, was another unexpected gift from the ashes of Oakridge Manor. As Maggie considered her next steps, she found herself drawn again and again to Eliza's words about purpose. The fortune recovered from the manor's hiding places would allow her to rebuild. But to what end? Another private home, when she had no need for such grandeur? A museum to the past, when the future beckoned? "At 62, I never expected to begin again," she confided to Thomas as they walked the grounds, surveying the damage. "But life doesn't end with age or loss. It ends when we stop finding purpose." Thomas nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "Eliza would agree with you. She never saw Oakridge Manor as just a home. It was a center of community, a place where people gathered, where help was offered to those who needed it." In that moment, Maggie knew what she wanted to do. The next morning, she contacted an architect who specialized in historical restoration, explaining her vision: to rebuild Oakridge Manor not as a private residence, but as the Eliza Thornfield Center for Senior Transitions, a supportive community for older adults who found themselves, like Maggie, starting over later in life. The West Wing would be restored to its original glory, housing a museum dedicated to Eliza and the Thornfield family, along with common spaces for residents. New construction, harmonious with the historical elements, would provide apartments and services for those in need of a fresh start. As word of the project spread, Maggie received an unexpected visitor, Robert Blackwell, Harold's son, who arrived unannounced one afternoon while she was reviewing plans with the architect. Unlike his father, Robert's manner was hesitant, almost apologetic. In his early 40s, he had his father's height, but none of his cold arrogance. He asked to speak with Maggie privately, and with some reservation she agreed. "I've come to give you something," he said, once they were seated in Martha's sunroom. From his briefcase, he withdrew a thick folder of documents. "Evidence of my family's crimes against yours. Not just Edwin's actions against Eliza, but my father's continued illegal efforts to seize Oakridge Manor. Financial records, threatening letters, and payment receipts to the arsonists who set the fire." Maggie stared at him, astonished. "Why would you betray your own father?" Robert's smile held no humor, only sadness. "I'm tired of being part of a legacy built on lies and theft. My father doesn't understand that money can't buy peace of mind or clear a guilty conscience." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to contribute to your center as some small atonement for my family's actions." With Robert's evidence, Eleanor was able to secure a restraining order against Harold Blackwell and initiate proceedings for damages related to the arson. Though direct proof of his involvement remained elusive, the circumstantial evidence, combined with the historical documentation of the Blackwell family's criminal activities, was damning enough to effectively neutralize the threat he posed. Construction on the Eliza Thornfield Center began that spring, the design carefully preserving what remained of the original structure while creating something new and purposeful. Maggie threw herself into the project, drawing on her decades of nursing experience to ensure the center would truly meet the needs of its future residents. Her relationship with Thomas deepened from friendship to something more, a partnership built on shared purpose and growing affection. At their age, they saw no need to define it further, content to enjoy each other's company as they worked side by side. Have you ever discovered that endings can become beautiful beginnings? Share your story in the comments. Let's see how Maggie's journey concludes. The day before the center's grand opening, Maggie received a visitor unlike any other, a frail elderly woman in her mid-90s, arrived by private car, accompanied by a nurse. She introduced herself as Jessica Harrison and requested to see the renovation. As Maggie led her through the nearly completed center, Jessica remained quiet, her eyes taking in every detail with curious intensity. When they reached the museum room, with its display of Eliza's personal items and photographs, Jessica stopped before the portrait of Eliza Thornfield. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" Jessica said softly. "Yes, she was," Maggie agreed. "Did you know her?" Jessica's smile held secrets decades old. In a manner of speaking. From her purse, she withdrew a yellowed envelope. "This belongs to you now." Inside was a photograph Maggie had never seen before. Eliza Thornfield in her 70s, gray-haired but still regal, seated in a garden somewhere far from Oak Ridge Hill. On the back, written in the same elegant hand as the journal, was a message. "For my daughter and her children's children. A house is not a home. Home is carried in the heart." "She lived," Maggie whispered, her fingers trembling as they traced the image. "All this time, we thought she vanished completely. But she escaped. She survived." Jessica nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She lived in obscurity under a different name, in a small town in Oregon. She never stopped thinking about the daughter she had to leave behind. My mother, Elizabeth." "You're my cousin," Maggie realized, the family connections realigning in her mind. "Great cousin, technically," Jessica corrected with a smile. "Mother never knew the truth. Eliza thought it safer that way. But she told me everything before she died, made me promise to watch over the family from afar. When I read about your court case with Blackwell, I knew it was time to come forward." The revelation completed a circle nearly a century in the making. Eliza hadn't abandoned her legacy. She had protected it, preserved it, waited patiently for the day when it would be safe to reclaim it through her descendants. On opening day, the Eliza Thornfield Center welcomed its first residents, 20 older adults who, like Maggie, had found themselves starting over later in life. The restored ballroom, where once the piano had played mysterious melodies, now hosted a celebration filled with music, laughter, and new beginnings. Harold Blackwell made one final appearance, attempting to disrupt the ceremony. He arrived with local officials claiming building code violations, but was intercepted by his own son. Their confrontation, witnessed by several attendees, ended with Harold being escorted from the property, his face flushed with the realization that his power and influence had finally been broken by the truth. As twilight fell, Maggie stood on the porch of what had once been Oak Ridge Manor, now transformed into a place of healing and hope. Rusty lay at her feet, his aging body relaxed in contentment. Thomas joined her, his hand finding hers in comfortable familiarity. "Do you think Eliza would approve?" Maggie asked, gazing out over the restored rose garden where the morning sun would soon touch new blooms. "I know she does," Thomas replied simply. From somewhere within the house, the faint notes of a piano drifted on the evening air. Maggie smiled, no longer afraid of the music or its source. "Thank you, Eliza," she whispered. "We're home." Maggie's story reminds us that it's never too late to begin again, to find new purpose in life. No matter your age, you can still create meaning and love. Have you experienced a moment of starting over like Maggie? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. This is Claire, wishing you sweet dreams and peaceful nights.